So we will start by this panel that Kathy has put together on money and politics, and a couple of really important people that can do that. So first of all, I'm going to change the slide.
Excuse me, I think Mike just called. I think he said he's locking his car. I think. But go ahead.
We'll still start. So Judge Levinson, would you just come up? You get to pick which chair you want. Mike is in here. Oh, and there's Mike. Okay. All right, he's coming in the other door, Kathy.
Before you let him in, get his amendment for sure.
All right.
Before he's here, let me just say the legislature agrees with everything that I'm going to say.
Okay, so I would first like, Mike, come on down.
I was locked out.
Oh, and as was Catherine All. Catherine, before I move into this introduction, Catherine All also came in that door. Our education, well, it's all, this door's, anyway. All right. Judge Ed Levinson is retired and is the immediate past chair of the Public Disclosure Commission, the agency that regulates Washington's campaign finance laws and helps ensure that information about campaigns is transparent to the public. Judge Levinson served 3 terms as the chair of this commission, during which time she led the commission to make major changes, which we will hear more about as we progress through this panel. She also co-chaired with longtime LWV member Representative Ruth Kagi the Blue Ribbon Commission that created the state's new Department of Children, Youth, and Families, reforming how states serves children and youth in its care. She also served as deputy mayor and legal counsel for Norm Rice here in Seattle. She is a lifelong reformer and has been a public policy leader for decades. She has a broad range of experience in this arena. As an advocate, she led efforts on multiple statewide ballot issues, I understand, kind of forever and ever.
Since I was 12.
And a judge, and as we said, the longest serving chair of the PDC. Our second panelist today is Representative Mike Pellicciotti. Even though your bio page says Pellicciotti, did you know that?
They both work just fine.
They both.
She is in there. It's, yeah.
Anyway, he represents the 30th Legislative District, which includes Algona, Auburn, Des Moines, Federal Way, Milton, and Pacific, south of here, and in the State House of Representatives. He has served as South King County as prosecutor, and then King County Deputy Prosecuting Attorney. While serving in Olympia, Mike has repeatedly brought forward legislation demanding transparency and accountability across government, elections, and the private sector. Believes in restoring the faith in government by restricting politicians and high-ranking government officials from the revolving door of becoming lobbyists immediately after leaving elected office. He's led passage of many of the bills that we have worked on in the legislature, and some of these have been to shine a new light on dark money, to ensure that large campaign donations are no longer hidden from the public. Mike strongly opposed the legislative effort to limit its release of legislative public records, the legislative public record. He's also fighting against corporate crime by proposing legislation that would increase corporate criminal penalties. He's chaired the Washington Equal Justice Coalition. As a child of educators, he attended public schools and finished the education, well, the formal education career, getting that Juris Doctorate from Gonzaga Law School, which is where we keep that connection because of the Spokane connection and that connection to my hometown, where his mother, Beth, is the president of our local league. So we do have a circle here. So those are our panelists. I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, Kathy Sakahara, who has been leading the charge on election issues for how long now? 7 years,
And wants to retire.
and is always working to build her team of people who work on election issues in Olympia. So we'll turn this over to Kathy.
Okay. I have to tell you that Ann and I had to sort of do an arm wrestle about introducing this panel. So I don't get to introduce them, except I am going to say these are probably our two best friends. Someone's going to be mad at me for this, but our two best friends in Olympia when it comes to the issue of money in politics. They are And Ann didn't also say that one of the reasons that we're particularly fond of Mike is he's a good boy and he does what his mother says. And his mother says, listen to the lead. And he does. All right. Well, so thank you for being here. And I want to just start out, the big question is, so what do we do about this money in politics issue? So can you tell us about what experiences you have had and examples of where you've seen money in politics being a problem? You guys choose where to start.
Well, hey. I will. Is the mic on?
It does take a while to warm up. And is yours, you push the button on the bottom, I think, or on the side? They're all different. Sorry, guys. Technical challenges here. Did you figure it out? Here. Let's switch, and I'll figure this out.
How's that?
Oh.
All right, I'll stand here for a minute, and then obviously we can, if we can get the microphone, I'll go back to the table. But first of all, thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Mike Pellicciotti. I am very, very happy to be here. As both Kathy and Ann mentioned, that my mom is the president of Spokane League, and it is always important to listen to your mother. I think especially when you're an elected official, we need that more and more. I think good things happen when you do that. I appreciate the initial question related to money in politics because it has been an issue that I've been working on and that I care very deeply about. I know all of you do as well, but sometimes I think it's helpful to tell stories from folks kind of on the inside who see things, so that you can kind of have examples so you can best advocate for a lot of the issues that I know we care about. And one of the things that was very eye-opening for me initially as a state elected official, actually before that, when I was first running for office in 2016, is I was committed and still am as being one of the only state elected officials who's never taken any corporate donations. And I think obviously I knew that was important when I started doing that, and then I've come to realize just actually how much more important it is than even I think I initially realized. And I'll just give a quick story. When I was first running in 2016 for the legislature, I was running against an 18-year Republican political incumbent. I was just knocking on doors. I ended up personally knocking on over 15,000 doors when I first ran, which is essentially what you have to do when you actually taking on a political incumbent like that. And during the primary election, nobody was paying any attention to our race at all, right? I mean, they were like, "Oh, good, good luck, see what you can do." But after the primary, we actually, as you know, it's a top two. It was just me and the incumbent, and so we're both on the ballot, and so we're both moving on. But it's essentially a poll, right? You get an idea of the result there. And we actually won in the primary by a few points against the incumbent. And suddenly, people actually paid attention very quickly to our campaign and the race. And it was very easy to not accept corporate donations before that. Because it wasn't like they were knocking on the door and coming to chat with me about the race. I definitely saw it coming on the other side, but that's that. But what happened is after I won, a lobbyist came and sat down with me, and they wanted to meet, and they said, "Hey, Mike, we're really impressed with your campaign." And I was like, "Wow, that's great. Someone actually is noticing what we're doing." And we want to be on Team Mike. And they said, "Here we have a check, maximum contribution check. We're really excited about your campaign and want to support you." I was like, "Wow, thank you again. I mean, this is validation that we're really doing something right." And but I said, "Well, thank you very much. This is one of those kind of decision points that you made." As I kind of made up my mind at that point. I said, I'm not accepting any corporate donations, but your thoughtfulness is appreciated, right? It's very much appreciated. And it wasn't the response that I expected. I don't know what I expected. I thought there would be a sense of like, well, good, we don't have to give you money, but you appreciate it. That's great. But instead, the eyes got first very confused, but second, the brows kind of furrowed a little bit, and they were like, "Oh, I see." So he took the check back, put it in his binder, and said, "Good luck to you." And that was the end of the meeting. I was like, well, that didn't go well at all. That's not what I was expecting. The next day, he gave that check to my opponent. Right? The next day. I knew that later because the PDC, which always reports all that information, highlighted the date that the check was received, was that next day. And so, and then of course after the election, checks just kind of start showing up in the mail. You don't even ask for it. Like literally you open your box and there are dozens and dozens of checks. And again, then it got actually kind of a little bit of a pain because then I had to mail them back, and that was a whole thing. But I was feeling good about what we were doing, but you start to realize just how easy that money comes in after we won the general election, that is. But what I've come to realize is that the challenge with money in politics, it's not that individual elected officials change their views or their particular kind of values in any way. What happens is a larger impact that it has. And so I'll give you an example. When I hear from a constituent, you're hearing all the cities that I represent. If I hear from a constituent, I want that issue to work out for that constituent. Right? If they have an idea of legislation, I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds good. I want that to work out. Or if they have an issue with government, I want to navigate that issue for them. It's not going to compromise my values. If they come in and want me to do a bill inconsistent with my values, I'm not going to do something different. But I think what happens with money in politics, especially when you deal with a corporation that's giving money, that entity becomes a constituent of that elected official. So it's not that elected official is going to change their values in any way, but they're being contacted by someone they have a relationship with. They want it to work out for that person. And I think that's where things go wrong, is because you have individual bills that might not have any impact at all or in any significant way on that member's district. But what happens is someone contacts them, and they, of course, lobbyists frames it in the context of the issue that they care about, like on issues that they care about. Oh, you care about cutting red tape in business. Well, this is a great bill to cut red tape in business and deregulate this industry, right? They don't put it in that context. But I think that's where I've seen it have an impact, and the larger corrosive impact, and why I think it's an issue that we need to keep working on. Why I just appreciate it. I love coming to this event, because I know so many like-minded people are so dedicated to this issue. So I guess I'll just leave that to general answer.
And now is this on? This is on. Here, so I'm going to hand this one to Ann. I'll take this one back, and
All right.
we'll try and turn this on. I think it's on. You have to kind of swallow it.
All right, very good.
It's on, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, first, thanks for having me here. I really appreciate everything the League does. I'm a longtime League fan for a couple of reasons. Many of those ballot measure campaigns that Ann mentioned earlier that I had chaired, the League was an integral part of those coalitions, and we can talk more about that. But that partnership has been invaluable. And then, after I was appointed to the PDC, became increasingly aware of the League's leadership role in the creation of the PDC. And in the very first initiative, working with Jolene Unsold, that created our campaign finance laws and this agency, and gave us the transparency we have in our state that many states don't have. So thank you for all that has happened in our state as a result of the League's advocacy. I had the opportunity to speak up in Bellingham recently and to speak remotely to the Spokane conference or meeting, and so I want to thank folks who are here today who were there. It's been really great for me to get to be a part of these advocacy days. So my first real campaign experience was for Alan Cranston. Yay, y'all remember, so I'm aging myself, but so that was 1984 in Iowa. I was in Iowa, working in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, organizing in the caucuses in the middle of winter, not knowing any better, and when you're that age, sleeping in a basement seems like a really cool thing, right? And so I saw the impact of money in politics close up there at the federal level. And by the way, I saw the impact of money in politics at the personal level, because there we were, blizzards, working our tails off, and we got to the caucus vote, and about 10 minutes later we were told, sorry, there's no money left in our campaign, good luck finding your way home. So that was my first real lesson in the impact of politics, money in politics. Then one thing that wasn't mentioned about my bio is I was chair in the Locke administration. I was chair of the Utilities and Transportation Commission, and that's the entity in our state that regulates telecommunications and energy companies. And in those years, that happened to be just after Enron had worked to deregulate the energy industry in California. And so I ended up being in a leadership position here in our state to stop that from happening, and saw firsthand how a small agency, again with a limited number of staff, was trying to advocate at the legislature with an industry that had a huge number of very well-paid lobbyists and attorneys. And it was somewhat of a Don Quixote-ish experience, but to the credit of our governor, our legislature, our UTC, and our public, we fought that back and won. And as a result, our public is much better served here. But that was, again, to Mike's point, that was an up-close view of the impact of money in the governing process. And then just one other quick one I want to mention is in Referendum 71, which was the effort to roll back our domestic partnership law here in 2006. I was chairing the opposition campaign there. That was my first real significant interaction with the gentleman you might be familiar with. His first name is Tim. And he and some very conservative religious organizations had banded together to try to repeal the law. And so we thought there was some fraud going on. We thought there was some failure to identify sources and uses of money. And then we thought that the petition, there were some folks being listed as having signed the petitions in order to get the measure on the ballot.
Thanks, Judge Levinson, excuse me for a second. We've had a request that you folks move. We're going to turn off the slide, and I'm going to make a quick reminder in terms of our diverse community.
Yes.
There are people with different physical abilities, and we do have people with levels of hearing loss and who rely on reading lips, which is apparently difficult against a white background. Okay, so maybe each of you would stand there. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you for telling me.
Maybe you can turn the black screen off.
Yeah, we don't.
We've seen it.
Yeah, we don't need to.
Well, I don't know. It's like,
Paging Amy.
That's a good idea.
I don't know how to toggle out of there without mucking the whole thing up, so that's my technique.
Do you trust me to play with it? Probably not. But I'm going to do it anyway.
So I'll just add real quick on this point. There you go. So in that campaign, we that money in technology is a good thing.
Does this work?
that's better. Much better.
Okay, so yes, all right, Martin. I hate coming up with me. Oh, you're not coming up to do that. Okay, I want a young person. Amy, will you come up and make the image go away? I'm so sorry. Keep talking.
No.
Turn it off. Oh, there you go.
Or just roll it.
Yes,
said it's okay.
Or I don't know where the projector is. I guess that's, the projector's up there. That's the problem.
Yeah, they can't just put
Oh.
But if they want it dark, this is better. When you turn it off, it's going to be white.
That's a good point. All right, we're going to live with it.
Just leave it.
Take it away, Judge.
All right. Okay. So you still have sound? So just real quick, in that effort in 2006, there were a number of folks collecting signatures, paid signature gatherers, and they were asserting that folks who had signed these petitions were legitimate voters who should be signing petitions. And so I'll tell you more about this later, but in essence, we ended up having to fight back a number of groups that we believe were getting federal, national funding from across the country that were not reporting it and that were influencing not only the election results, but something getting on the ballot. So we ended up in federal court, and we ended up going all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I can talk more about that. So throughout all those experiences, I was one who was advocating in a whining way, where the heck is the PDC? And so, so when a few years ago, when there was an opening on the PDC, the governor said, okay, fine, you go. So that's what got me over to the PDC, where I've spent the last 5 years of my term. It's just coming to an end, and as Kathy mentioned, I had the opportunity to chair it for the last 3 terms, and we can talk more about those reforms. But I just want to say, by way of introduction, we are so fortunate to have a PDC and the campaign finance laws we have here. When I talk to my colleagues in other states, they do not have what we have. And while we have a lot to be disappointed about regarding the impact, the corrupting influence of money in politics, the fact that we have transparency makes a huge difference. If you look just at what we had here in the city of Seattle in terms of the involvement of Amazon and corporate influence in the last local council elections, we all agree about the inappropriate overspending by corporate actors in that, but were it not for our transparency laws and our Ethics and Elections Commission and our PDC, we would not have known about that, and the outcome of the election would have been very different. So, just as much as we can't, due to the Citizens United ruling and some other things, we can't control expenditures, we can certainly control access to information and awareness and help keep voters more informed. Well, I know we'll talk about this more today, but we're really fortunate, and again, the League was involved in making that happen in the very beginning.
Okay, thank you so much. I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to combine a couple of the questions because they all sort of center around this basic issue. So again, it's what can we do about the problem of money in politics. So I'm going to ask both of you what you've accomplished in that area that we need to know about, what you're working on now, what you see coming up in 2020. So we'll give them more time than I was anticipating for one question because it's kind of 3 questions.
Okay, great. Well, and I'll stand over here if that's okay, if that maybe helps standing away from the screen a little bit. Actually, I want to start off by thanking Judge Levinson and her work with the PDC because, what folks don't always realize is when we pass legislation, it's not always perfect in how it's originally written. And Judge Levinson's had to deal with that as a judge in dealing with legislation that isn't always, the statutes that aren't always clear and as ideal as they can be. But as a part of the PDC, they serve as an administrative function as well, and helping write the laws and make sure they work. And that's something that I know they're doing right now in some legislation that I've been a part of, and I certainly appreciate that role as well, which I think has been a continued effort to perfect the work of the legislature and making sure things are more transparent. But I do want to follow up as we talk about some of the issues, at least that I've been able to work on a little bit what Judge Levinson was just talking about, related to the latest city council elections here in the city of Seattle. A bill that I introduced in the House, that Senator Billig introduced in the Senate, that passed last year to get dark money out of politics. I see people like Cindy Black here, and obviously, with Fix Democracy First, and all of the great work by the League in advocating for that bill to pass that into law, so that no longer could entities kind of pass nearly unlimited funds through certain nonprofits, and we would not know the source of where that money was coming from. And then, of course, the follow-up bill that I introduced last year, again with the help of so many of you in the room, and passed it into law and had the governor sign it, which was our PAC transparency bill, so that even when information was being disclosed to the PDC, it now actually has to be on the mailers, in the TV ads, so voters don't have just friendly-sounding PAC names that essentially hide from the recipient of that political advertisement who the real donors are. Now entities have to disclose who the actual individuals and corporations are who are those top contributors. Well, we passed that because of the good work of so many of you in this room, but I do want to highlight the city council elections that Judge Levinson was mentioning.
Oh, did it die?
Yeah.
Here, this one I think is working. Hello? No? All right.
We'll just talk about it.
Yeah, just come over here.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, I think we got it now. Because we required that you could no longer have dark money, no longer could, and I'll just use the direct example, somebody like Amazon pass money through the local Chamber of Commerce and then have ads come from the Chamber of Commerce. It was going to come from Amazon, right? Like, we knew it was going to come from Amazon. And then next, well, if Amazon has to disclose on the mailers that it's coming from Amazon, well, at that point, they might as well just own it. Right? And say we're putting $1.5 million into this campaign, which is exactly what happened. That's their First Amendment right. Guess what? The public knew it and voted accordingly. Right? And people can vote however they want to vote on that. I mean, you know, people have different views related to Amazon. That's fine. And I don't mean to use them as an example other than the fact that it's the most recent example since a lot of the laws that you were a part of in getting these passed. And when I say you were a part of, you have been integral in that, because when I introduced this legislation related to PAC transparency, related to dark money, the lobbyists aren't lining up to testify in favor of my bill. Right? Now, it helps being vice chair of the State Government Committee, because I know I'm pushing that bill through the House State Government Committee one way or the other. But you know who I do hear from? I hear from people like Kathy Sakahara, from Cindy Black, right? From so many of you who come. And nothing is more impactful than when you come and say, hey, I've driven here from Seattle. I've driven here from Poulsbo. I've come in from Yakima today because I am a citizen who cares about this issue. That's impactful. And I guess don't lose sight of the fact how impactful you can be when you do that and how it makes a difference. And for somebody like me, how much I appreciate it, because nobody else is showing up. Right? So I guess I would say, related to some of the things we've been able to pass, it's been we've been able to do a lot. And we also mentioned my Corporate Crime Act to increase penalties against corporations that commit crimes for the first time since 1924. Right? I mean, the maximum penalty was $10,000 until we passed my Corporate Crime Act. The governor signed into law. It's now $1 million per incident per offense.
Yay.
And a lot of that comes from my background. You know, I've been serving as an assistant attorney general and have been dealing with corporate financial crimes now for a number of years. And I just realized the law needed to kind of catch up with the times. I wasn't coming in with the law saying it should be a gazillion dollars, right? I just wanted the law to catch up with the times. And again, you know, a lot of these victories we've been able to have related to transparency and making sure that the government is best serving the public interest is because of so many committed individuals like you for the work that you do. So I just want to thank you, and that's why I always love coming back to this group to say thank you.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. Major, see, I can do world peace now. I got the microphone. So, a couple of things. One thing that you just mentioned that struck home. It is so hard to keep statutory and regulatory authority up to date with changes that happen at lightning speed. And so often our laws are just out of date with the issues we're seeing, and in the world of campaign finance that becomes critically important. So one of the big things that I've worked on in the last few years is overhauling, updating, and reforming our state laws regarding campaign finance. So our laws still had things in them like regulating night letters. The word digital wasn't anywhere in statute. And we had an anachronistic practice that had sort of swallowed the entire field that were called citizen action complaints. And the agency went from having fewer than 100 complaints a year to more than 800 in 2017. And many of those were from an older section of the statute that allowed a citizen to go ahead and go directly, basically, to go around the PDC, file a complaint, step into the shoes of the state, and go to court. So I won't regale you with all of the negative impacts of that, but needless to say, the state law needed a major overhaul and updating. So a couple of the big things that have really made a difference, and you all played a key role in testifying, both coming to the agency for hearings and then going to the legislature, and then going to the governor when we needed some veto or non-veto action. We now have in law what we didn't have before. We have a range of alternatives to handle minor complaints. Our philosophy, our guiding philosophy at the PDC is that we want to help people get it right. Our priority is to get information out to the voters and the public so they can make informed decisions. Our priority is not trying to ding people and get them in trouble. And the law is complicated. And there are 10,000 to 11,000 filings that we require that are made every year. And many candidates, campaigns, lobbyists who are required to report. All elected officials and high appointed officials are required to file financial statements. So what we want to do is make sure that first and foremost we're helping people be successful. So provide filer assistance, make the law and rules understandable, provide alternatives. So we didn't used to have alternative remedies. Used to just have this big hammer and everything was treated in the same way. And there was a backlog of complaints a mile long. So the idea was streamline, provide alternatives, help people get it right, and then focus the public's tax dollars on the most significant violators and the type of enforcement that will really help the public. Sometimes that results in litigation. You've seen that have been in significant litigation in partnership with the Attorney General's office in the Hyman cases and the grocery manufacturers case that's now pending in front of the state Supreme Court. And then a range of other things that are really important to the public, and I hope you will take advantage of them. The agency for years and years and years was underfunded and cut. Its technology is very far out of date. Its systems were all paper and hard copy. So we are now moving toward electronic apps. You know, we want this to be as easy as everything else you do, whether you're ordering from a company I guess we won't talk about here.
We will later.
Okay, so one of the things, one of my priorities coming in was, if you can track your ballot and you can track your UPS package, I want you to be able to track your complaint. And I want both the complainant and the respondent and the public and the media to know what complaints are in the queue, where they are, what the result. So now we have a totally transparent database. Every complaint that's made and every step that's taken and the resolution of each of those is on our database. You can go to anything you want. It's all open access data. We have, I think, 7 million open access records now on the database. We update the website the staff update the website 4 times a day. So you can now track that. The other thing is we wanted to have information in a much more accessible form. So when things are hard copy, you can't search, you can't compare, you can't see trends. So it becomes almost a faux transparency, right? A pretense of transparency. We wanted you to have the information in real time and in a way that's searchable and accessible. And again, we have to change state law to keep up with that. So there's a number of issues happening now that we can talk more about. There are going to be a lot of interest to folks. One of them has to do with advertisement and disclosure. You've seen this discussed at the federal level, and it's a big issue in our state having to do with Facebook and Google. We can talk some more about that. But when you look at the state law and it talks about you have the right to go publicly inspect records, that's in reference to you having to get in your car, take the bus, go drive to King TV or Spokane Radio, ask, may I please see the records, sitting down and looking at the records, copying your notes. That is not the way the world works anymore. So we're going to talk more about that. There are a range of things where what we're trying to do as an agency is make the law, the regulations, the practices, the technology really as robust as possible so that the commitments that we're making to the public are meaningful. It's not, there's some transparency now and again, as long as you wait a few weeks, there is transparency in accessible ways so that you can make informed decisions when it really matters, not after election day has come and gone. Okay.
Thank you. I do want to leave lots of time for you folks to ask questions. I have one final one, and then if there aren't enough from there, which I think there will be, I will have some more. But one of the ones I want to ask is, it is a bit self-serving, but I think it's relevant to this audience. How is the league perceived, either in the legislature or your agency? And more importantly, what can we do? What can individual members do to enhance our impact?
Well, first of all, your reputation is great in Olympia. It's because of the work you do and the issues that you advocate for and the commitment you have to that. I think I touched on this a little bit a few minutes ago. Continue to be involved in the many ways that you're involved, right? I mean, obviously writing letters to the editor is always helpful, being committed on so many different issues. But when it comes to Olympia, come testify. Come testifying. And I understand that's asking a lot for some folks. That's a challenge for a number of reasons, and those are some of the things we're working on in terms of remote testimony. But obviously, writing your elected officials. I mean, when I get a handwritten note from somebody, I pay attention to that, and I write back accordingly. And so I think that those things are impactful, even when it seems like sometimes it isn't. I can tell you, especially collectively, when you all do it, it is. And being a part of the league is that much more impactful. And you mentioned it's kind of self-serving questions. Well, I'll do a kind of self-serving aspect to it too. I have my bill on the revolving door for lobbying, and that was one of the things that was mentioned. And I know that's something many of you care about, which is, for those who don't know, the bill to make it so elected officials like me cannot immediately become paid lobbyists after our public service, or leave in the middle of our term and become a paid lobbyist in the middle of our term. The federal government has a 2-year cooling off period. State of Washington, the cooling off period is the amount of time it would take for me to go from my office, go to my car, empty out my things, come back and lobby the person who now has taken over my office.
I think he meant come back and register with the BBC.
That's good. Well, and there's such efficient stuff now. It's so easy to register with those things that you can do it lightning quick, and that's the issue. There should be a cooling off period because it raises questions, right? Even if there isn't any nefarious thing underway, it raises questions when you immediately become a paid lobbyist. Were you working out the details of this contract while you were in office, right? Did that in some way affect your judgment on legislation you were going to vote on if you knew that you were about ready to seek or accept employment with somebody who was significantly impacted by that legislation? I've had this bill now, I've been in the legislature, I was elected in 2016, I've been in the legislature since 2017. I've introduced it every year in the House. We've passed it through the House State Government Committee every year. I am hopeful this year there is a renewed interest and attention on this bill. And to the extent you have an interest as well, I very, very much would love for you to contact your particular representatives to share your views on that issue. And so I say that in the context that there are always ways to contribute and make a difference on that. Can we answer some questions?
Sure. Oh, no, excuse me, one second. Sir, would you come up here? Yeah, go ahead and come up here. One thing I want to say is the way we do questions and answers, or the way I hope we will do questions and answers, is that the person who wants to ask a question will come up, face the audience. Remember, we're also dealing with people who like to read lips. It's not okay to say, I can talk loud, everyone can hear me. You're not going to say to. So if at any point you want to ask a question, I'm going to ask that the questions themselves be brief so we can have them answered.
It's very brief. Does the anti-revolving door bill have a bill number?
What a great question. And I will look at it on my phone while Judge Levinson's answering the next question. I will have that ready for you.
Is it 1667 or was that the one that we passed?
I will confirm,
Okay.
so you have the absolute correct information. You can see it's been about 6 months since we've been legislative session. I gotta get back at it. But I will look that up and I will have that for you in the next minute.
I believe it's listed on the campaign finance issue paper. It's definitely listed on our web, but Mike will find it. Great question, Judge.
All right. So we have a bill pending that would be great to have you all involved in. This year's bill has a few areas of focus. It's not as significant and comprehensive as what we've done the last couple of sessions, but there are 4 or 5 areas that you probably care about. The first is, do you all remember the issue of what we refer to as faux mailers, where in the last election, not this one, the one before, where the sponsor of these, the initiator of these, said candidate so-and-so has been endorsed by group so-and-so, only candidate so-and-so wasn't actually on the ballot, right? And the idea was to confuse the voters and pull you away from voting for the other candidate by having you think that somebody else had been the one endorsed. So there's nothing in state law that prohibited that, and it's a tough issue to regulate lying, as you know. In campaign communication, you can't just much as I might like to prohibit lying or require accuracy. So what we've done in this legislation is require more disclosure. So the individual that's producing the mailer has to put on the mailer, or anywhere else it is, if it's not a mailer, whatever the vehicle is, this is not the election for which this individual is running, or this, there's specific words we have there, but in essence, this individual is not running in this election. This individual has not qualified as a write-in, or this is not the election for which this individual, whatever it is the false information has to be declared and stated on the, that's how we're gonna get at it. So my guess is that would discourage people from playing this game, but so that's in there. The second one, the second issue you might be interested in that's in our legislation is one that I've been involved in a number of years, where it seems like a tiny thing, but it's made a huge difference. What constitutes a ballot proposition such that the entities spending money have to report? So this has gone all the way up to our state Supreme Court, and it's been the subject of a lot of litigation and enforcement action over the years. And the issue there is, when you take a ballot measure at a statewide level, you have to go, you work with the Attorney General's office, Secretary of State, you get a ballot title, and then you start collecting signatures. So everybody knows that's when you're starting the process. In a lot of local jurisdictions, you can go out and collect signatures before you present it to an election official to ask for it to be on the ballot. So we had a number of issues where in those local ones, we had a lot of money being put in by outside organizations, either for legal costs or for other expenses, and they weren't reporting it because the definition in state statute was confusing about when something becomes a ballot proposition. So we've got a proposal in this legislation, not yet numbered legislation, to fix that. And then the third is we were able to secure, with wonderful help a couple sessions ago, finally, a funding stream for the PDC. It's called a Transparency Fund. It's a dedicated fund so that when there are fines and fees as a result of litigation or enforcement actions, instead of that money going to the general fund and the agency having its budget cut, this money now can return to the agency. So it's supposed to be not swept for any other purpose and a dedicated fund for the agency. So the proposal is there a way to have the legislature sign off on a set of projects? We've put together, there are 5 million plus, probably up to 6 million now, technology projects this agency needs to get current. From an overhaul of the website to an overhaul of its campaign finance system, the so-called ORCA, that's the nickname for this. If you're a treasurer in a campaign, you know that this system is 11 years old, and you have to use an old Word software, out-of-date software in order to do this. I get a lot of heads nodding whenever I say this. To overhaul that system, to overhaul what I mentioned, we're moving to everything to apps, to overhaul, we want to create an ad archive so that all commercial advertisers who have ads, whether they're TV stations or digital, it's housed on the PDC website, and the public can have access to the ads. There's information about who's being targeted, the micro-targeting that's such a problem, who's spending, how much they're spending, when the ad was bought, when it ran. That's never existed before, and it's not yet up and running anywhere that I'm aware of. So we want to lead the country in that area. Anyway,
Here.
thank you. This is something I proposed last year, and it was sort of pie in the sky when I proposed it. We're now in the scoping stage, and we've got to secure funding for it. So what's in this bill is a request to the legislature of would they authorize the Transparency Fund to be what's called non-appropriated. So the agency doesn't have to go back every session and say, here's what's in the fund, could we spend it now, please? And the way I thought best to approach that was to put the list together of all the projects and say, here's what this money would go for. When it comes in, if there's a court settlement, can we go ahead and draw down from the fund and get going on that project? And that's a hard thing to do in government, so I don't know that we'll get there, but that's the proposal.
Okay, super. So if you're interested in asking a question, come on up here. I have a really quick one before you put down the mic. You mentioned that one year there was a huge increase in complaints, and some of us might say, well, if you guys were ignoring them at the PDC, that's good that someone did that. Can you just really briefly give a couple of two examples of some of the complaints that were raised that maybe didn't raise to the level of a Supreme Court case?
Well, there are some people who like to weaponize the system, right? They want to file a complaint so they can say so-and-so's a bad candidate, she has a complaint against her, especially especially if you know it's going to take months to get the complaint resolved. You can hang it over the person's head. So some people do chip away at little things and say, you were supposed to say Thursday here and you said Friday on your report, so there's a complaint. We saw a lot of that, and that's why I so wanted to push for getting these alternatives. We required ourselves, and the legislature put this in statute for us, it now requires the agency to resolve all complaints within 90 days or to set them on a path to full investigation. So all of those smaller things got to be in and out of the system now within 90 days. And that's eliminated a huge amount of the backlog. It's also showed the people who are trying to do the right thing and just make mistakes that we do things called statements of understanding and warning letters and all these other things now. And then the bigger stuff goes on a full investigation track, and then if there's something serious going on, we want to have the ability, again, to get to the results of those investigations in a time where it's most meaningful. And so by able to prioritize cases, we've now passed rules prioritizing that these cases are handled based on impact to the public, and it's made a real difference. Not there all the way yet, but along the path.
The reason I raised that is I heard examples where someone like Mike Pellicciotti might once have written his name as Michael, and that was fraud, and that was, whatever. So, I mean, it was that, or forgot to dot an I, almost literally that trivial. Okay, next question. Indicate who it's for.
Probably Mike. I wanted to know what might be happening on spending limits for some of those lower level forgotten positions like port commissioners, and I know there was some action on judges, and I'm talking about school board candidates because we have not experienced it here, but in neighboring states and others, one of those big PACs called Stand for Children has been very actively trying to push their point of view on legislators.
Well, thank you for the question. And Kathy was pointing out, having to dot I's and things. When you name like Pellicciotti, you have a lot of experience with dotting I's and crossing T's. But before I answer that question, I promised you I'd give you the bill number. And as I was mentioning, the league is such a good partner. It was like immediately someone actually brought me up a list that had that bill as the number one bill that had to pass last session to focus on. So it's House Bill 1067, House Bill 1067 is the revolving door legislation. It's actually listed as employment after government service or something is the title, but it's revolving door legislation. And I should point out, Senator Reuben Carlisle has the Senate companion bill and has been a real leader on this issue too. He hasn't been able to get any traction in the Senate, but obviously contacting your senators related to your interest in that bill, and his good bill in the Senate is equally important. Answering that question, specifically the question for those who might not have heard it was thoughts related to not having unlimited spending for some races that aren't as, I don't want to say necessarily as high profile, because some of these races have become very high profile given the policy decisions with things like the port offices and issues. I heard the school board as well. What I can say is last session, we had a bill that was introduced by Representative Wiley, on port limitations, because what some folks don't know is while there are limitations on legislative races, for governor, for attorney general, you name it, there weren't for certain races like the port of various ports. And some of you may have heard of various decisions made by ports related to environmental issues, some up in Bellingham, some down in the Vancouver, Washington area, in which nearly unlimited money, maybe I'm overstating, but we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars were pouring in to support certain candidates related to very impactful decisions that these governmental bodies were making. And there were no campaign limits put on it. And I know Representative Wiley had introduced that bill as a bill I co-sponsored in the House, and I think I got that across. The governor signed that last year. I remember I was passing it in the House, and I think that's the type of progress we need to make. The challenge is we're often very responsive after bad things happen, and sometimes our government works. So it was because of some major high-profile incidents. But if you are seeing it in other races, I guess bring it to my attention. It's something I'd be very interested in. That I'm not, while I care deeply about these issues, I guess I'm not aware of all the different impacts that may or may not occur. Obviously, Judge Levinson would be more more familiar can comment on that. But I think we need to be vigilant and make sure we're best representing and putting limitations where they're constitutionally appropriate like that.
Okay, so we're close down to time. I'm going to take one more question. Just very quickly, Ann will talk more about this later. You will know, if you read your emails from us, please read your emails, when this bill is up for hearing, when it's up for a vote, when we need you to send a letter. And the other thing we sometimes talk about is the Public Disclosure Commission wants help from us above and beyond lobbying. They want us to serve as a focus group. They want us to sort of help them with their work. And I'm saying that because our next questioner is one of the people who rose to that challenge, and all of you are invited to do that as well, and served on the redesign of the website.
Thank you. So my name is Toyoko from Clark County, and I have a question to Anne.
Okay.
So I involved in a project for Next Generation Campaign Finance Data project. And it was a wonderful, wonderful data project, and then now it's running, and the people who work in there, they're excellent staff. So I have a question. So I know the data contains lobbyist names and lobbyist employers.
Yes.
And you can all see them. Only things I could not find is who are those lobbyists contacting? And I wanted to know how many hours they have a contact with each candidate, because money buys the contacting time, which should not be. They should have an equal number of hours to everybody. So that's my question. Is there any way you can implement that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you for being on that group. That was one of our user groups we try whenever we do new technology. We have a terrific staff, and the IT team is wonderful. And we want the folks who are relying on the technology to be providing the input as we develop it so that it's actually workable, understandable. And this was our lobbyist app, where now you're getting more information online more quickly because lobbyists are having to report electronically, and there's an app where they can carry forward month to month, and they can report from their phones. So this is much better technology. The state law requires them to report who they are lobbying for and what they're lobbying about, but it doesn't have more specificity than that. So one could think about advocating for more specificity in state law. You could also work with the agency on seeing if through rulemaking we can enhance. Sometimes if the umbrella in state law is broad enough and it says the agency may enact rules to enforce the purpose of this, then that gives the agency the flexibility. Happy to work more with you on that. I think it's an important question. And sometimes reports can be, again, theoretically helpful, but not substantively valuable. It gives you the information you need, and it's up to the agency to make sure the rules for what people have to report are specific enough to require it. Sometimes you have to be more prescriptive.
Let's give a huge round of thank you. The state we're in. So if you've got too many, share it with somebody else, and so that you know what we are all about in the schools and promoting that. So thank you all. Thank you again to Toyoko for her involvement with the PDC. And thank you to Kathy for moderating our panel. Okay, just a quick recap.